trying to talk to Jeremy, who's here with me the other day, and the internet did not work out for us. But Jeremy Davies from the Fatherhood Institute, how are you doing today?
I'm very good, and it's good to finally see you instead of that wheel of death thing going round and round and round, which is what happened.
Well, some people would say they'd prefer that than seeing my face. There you go. They are cruel people, but they're probably accurate. Yeah, so we had a bit of a technical issue during the DLS Sessions the other day, but hey, we appear to have fixed it right now. So Jeremy, basically, tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm Jeremy Davies. I'm the head of impact and communications at the Fatherhood Institute, which I hope some of your listeners will have already heard of. We're a small charity, but we like to think we sort of punch above our weight. We've been around for, well, next year will be our 25th anniversary, incredibly. And I suppose what we do is we kind of advocate for involved fatherhood. So we do lots of different strands of work. We're involved in research, lobbying for changes in policy. We do lots of training of family professionals, health visitors, social workers, and people like that. So yeah, we've got fingers in lots of pies, and we try to do our best to further the cause of better support for dads.
Is then the end goal to get to a point where there's no need for you to do what you do?
I mean, that would be amazing. Given where we've got to in the first 25 years, I feel like we could be going for centuries until we become unnecessary. But yes, I mean, eventually, I guess we ought to be moving towards a position where some of the stuff that we work on is just so obvious and so standardized in people's thinking and practice that we ought to be putting ourselves out of a job. But yeah, I can tell you we're a long way from that as things stand.
You talk about speaking to people like health visitors and things. There is still quite a disconnect in how mums and dads are treated in the early days of being parents, isn't there? Why do you think that might be?
I mean, I think we all of our systems are out of date, and they haven't caught up with the realities of how modern families are living, how they want to live, and their aspirations to share the earning and caregiving that needs to be done when you have children. So pretty much all the systems that surround us as families, were created decades ago, and they've barely changed. So we need to really kind of get the politicians and the people who run services to think about their own lives and the families that they know, and because they must see in everyday life, they must see that people are doing things differently and want to do things differently. But making the connection between that and actually changing the laws, changing the guidelines that create our systems, it's just that there is a disconnect, and we do our best to try and kind of fill that gap. I guess it's so systemic, and it's in so many different aspects of life. So policy on employment, policy on what maternity services are doing, who they see as the patient, even down to like really basic things like, is there a space on the form to record who the father is? And if there is, which most of the time there isn't, but even if there is, how is that then connecting so that when that guy turns up in a health system somewhere, the professional is seeing him as a father rather than just a guy? And so unless we start to connect all these things together, what we end up with is just mothers being viewed as the ones who are responsible for, not just giving birth, but looking after children, being responsible for them all the way through their lives, and all of that. So it's a huge task, and I think it takes action on lots of different fronts to change things.
It's hard, isn't it? Because it is in the best interest of everyone to have more people involved and more people responsible. So it's not as if it's like a case of a war where dads are coming to take mum's roles, or those kind of culture war type things that you hear a lot about. But actually, surely, if everyone is involved and recognized as being involved and is able to be accessible for help and support and things, that makes everyone's life better. It just seems to make sense, right?
It absolutely does. And I always think, and we often say, like in our training courses and so on, this is not about being nice to dads, okay? There are a million and one reasons for getting better at engaging fathers. And yes, somewhere in the list of reasons are things that are about, making men's lives better or being nice to men. But, the bulk of it, you don't have to love men, and you don't have to be strongly of the view that fathers need to, that we want fathers doing more with their children or anything like that. It's just, you could focus entirely on the argument of making lives better for women, and you would want to do all these things. So, how many mothers do you know who want to feel completely responsible and be the only port of call for the state and the systems that we have around families? They don't. They want to share the joys and burdens of looking after children, especially when they're young. And it's beneficial for the children, it's beneficial for the mothers, let alone being beneficial for the fathers, to get a fair crack of the whip, if you like, at becoming confident at caregiving, because it's only when you do that you really have the sort of positive, transformative experience of fatherhood that lots of us have had. And we want that. The mothers want it for us. So it's really it's like a crazy situation that we still need to be pushing for, as I say, what often are quite basic changes, and that, as you say, are not just good for dads, they're good for children, and they're good for mothers too.
And I mean, no one needs to have the entirety of the burden of school admin on top of them at any point. That is something that you do need to share. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we published a report with Helen Norman at the University of Leeds earlier this year called the Peace Study. Peace standing for paternal involvement and its effects on children's education. And that study showed for the first time that fathers' early involvement in childcare, like when the children are very young, has a direct effect on children's attainment at schools. More direct, in fact, than the mother's impact. So it's not to say that the mothers don't have impact, but the mothers and fathers' impacts seem to work differently. So the mother's impact seems to be more on what you might call sort of mediators before you get to actual attainment. So things like children's behavior and stuff like that. The father, when the fathers spend time doing sort of positive interactive activities with their children, things like reading, playing, and so on, that actually directly relates to how well the children then do at the age of 5. And if they're involved at the age of 5, it has a direct impact on how well they do at the age of 7. So, you know, all of the evidence is there now that fathers are super important from a very early age. We also know that the earlier they get involved, the more likely they are to stay involved. But as part of the work we did around that study, we did some we did a survey of dads and we did some focus groups with fathers. And we heard time and again, you know, the fact that fathers are not receiving the letters from school. They don't get emails. Like often the school doesn't use modern things like email, you know. You get like a letter in the child's book bag, which is like crumpled up in the bottom, and like you'd be lucky if anybody sees it. If they do see it, it tends to be the mum because she's probably around more. So often the stuff that we really need the fathers to be seeing is not getting to them. Obviously, that becomes even more of a challenge when the fathers are not living with the child full time. But, you know, it's 2023. You know, different patterns of family life have been around for quite a while now. You would have thought that we could have sorted this out. And you would have thought that technology would have helped with that, and that it would be pretty achievable for all schools to have an up-to-date set of contact details for the father of every child who's registered with them. And yes, of course, sometimes people's phone numbers change and so on. And yes, of course, if you've got to send something out twice, maybe there's a little bit more work involved in that than sending it out once. But if your focus is on improving children's outcomes, and you can see quite clearly that having a father involved brings direct benefits to that child's learning, surely we should be doing it, even if it is a little bit more effort. But it seems not to be happening. So that, yeah, you know, that's one example of where dads end up being kind of left out of the picture.
So it seems to be that organizations and agencies and things are expecting the situation that people are in to try to fit into the system rather than designing the system for the different situations people are in, I guess.
I think so. And I mean, I think often, I mean, in our training courses as well, I think that there's a lot of negativity about fathers and modern families. There's a sort of, there's a sense often when we talk to practitioners that they have an exaggerated belief, for example, in single motherhood. Like even when the children are super young, you know, we've had midwives and health visitors who, when we ask them to estimate, you know, what percentage of families are together at the time of birth, let's say, and they'll say, you know, I don't know, 40%, 60% at birth. You're thinking, really? And indeed, the data shows that it's like 85% of families are together at that point, and that's like, you know, fully together. Of the remaining 15%, it's not that they're, you know, at loggerheads or, you know, fighting in the courts or anything like that necessarily. Okay, yes, there'll be a small percentage are, and obviously as the children get older, you know, some people split up. But there's this sort of knee-jerk assumption in the UK among the practitioners who are working with families that separation equals the father disappearing. It's like straight away they leap to that. And so it's like all of those separated families must be single mums. And, you know, the point is, even in families that do look on paper as if, you know, it's a child in what you'd call a lone mother household, that doesn't mean necessarily that there isn't a father involved. He may well not be living in the same house as them, but he could be very involved. He could be providing, the child could be staying with him as much as 50% of the time. And that's often the case. Or, you know, he's regularly involved, so he may not see them every day, but he's fully engaged in their lives, in doing what he can to support their development, their learning, and so on and so on. So I do think that there's quite a big hill to climb in changing people's perceptions of father involvement after separation. I think, you know, that's a recurring theme in the work that we do. I mean, even the terminology, for example, like we never use the word absent father. It's so judgmental and pejorative, and most of the time is not the case. And we don't even use non-resident father because that's inaccurate. It's too vague. It doesn't tell you what you need to know. What does it mean, non-resident? So we use the term own household father and own household mother. And then, you know, to be, if you're really doing your job properly, we would say, as a practitioner, you would use those as your basic terms, and then you would qualify them with some sort of definition of the level of contact with the child. So you might be, you know, an own resident father with majority or minority care, right? And similarly, the mum. And when you start to describe families in that way, you start to take some of the sort of stereotyping out of the picture, and you start to actually describe the things that matter about those families. So, you know, you're not saying, oh, it's a single mum, and, you know, with all the baggage that that concept has culturally, oh, you know, he's a non-resident father, meaning totally involved, not involved, totally uninterested, or whatever. So these kind of, by using more sensitive terminology, we think you can build a service that is much more responsive to the realities of what's going on in families.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about where you think the perceptions come from, but I guess a lot of it is language, isn't it? Like those terms are loaded, as you said, and that's, you know, changing the language is important in how we discuss these matters, I guess.
I think it's very important. I do, and it's interesting when we've. It took us a while to come up with our sort of own household father typology, if you like, and we've started kind of introducing that in various different contexts. So ranging from with, you know, people who do research, but the people who, for example, conduct the census, or these big kind of like the various large scale cohort studies that get done in the UK, look at, you know, tracking families through the years. So with those kind of people, with social workers, with health professionals, people working in early years, and so on. And yeah, it's a big shift, but often you will see the penny drop. You know, when you're doing training courses, people will start to really understand, if you give them the space to work through their thinking, that people will start to see the extent to which we are surrounded with negative stereotypes about caregiving men, and the corollary too, you know, assumptions about women as caregivers, you know, that they're naturally better, that all of them are kind of, I don't know, have this magical sort of maternal instinct that is unique and universal and female, and all of that. So yeah, you know, I think the stereotypes work in both ways, and we have so much to unpick. There are so many of these kind of black and white things in our culture. You know, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. You know, the latest. You know, we have toxic masculinity now. Is you know, the latest thing that we like to beat ourselves up about, and so on. So yeah, I think language is important, and we really need to give more space to more thoughtful definitions.
Mm-hmm. And talking about, as you were, the earlier that men are involved, the better the outcomes. It feeds into something else that the Fatherhood Institute's doing, which is campaigning for additional paternal leave. So, what is it? 6 weeks well-paid leave for dads.
Yes, that is our current policy call, which we are campaigning on at the moment. We have a petition live at the moment. which we're short of signatures for. So I really need to plug that, because we would love to get 10,000 signatures by the 10th of January. You will find the link on the homepage of our website.
I'll also put it in the description of this broadcast as well.
So yeah, so 6 weeks for dads is what we're calling for. This is not a perfect solution to the problem, and it's not necessarily the only place we will go in the fullness of time in our campaigning for better leave for fathers. But it feels like the right amount to be pushing for right now, okay, in the current political climate, with the, many pressures that the public finances seem to be under, and we just, on some level, I guess we need to. It feels like we need to have an element of realism in what we're calling for. So, what we think needs to happen is, the current UK system is the most gendered in the world, right? So mothers have access to 52 weeks leave. Most of it is not paid very well, but they do have access to 52 weeks, with 6 of it paid at 90% of salary. And fathers have 2 weeks, and it's paid at the derisory statutory rate, which is like less than half the minimum wage. We did some calculations earlier this year which showed that an average earning father taking 2 weeks statutory leave would lose out by over £1,000 if he took the 2 weeks, compared to if he'd carried on working. So, I mean, it's crazy. The paternity leave offer in the UK is like one of the worst in the world, actually. So we are arguing for 6 weeks, but not 6 weeks paternity leave. We think it would be better to have 2 weeks paternity leave paid at 90% of salary, and then another 4 weeks of parental leave, also paid at 90% of salary. The reason we think that's the better design, rather than just having 6 weeks paternity, is that, legally speaking, paternity and parental leave are 2 different things. So paternity leave, like maternity leave, can only be taken in a continuous block, and it needs to start around the time of the birth. So you give the date of the birth, and your leave starts on a certain date, and then it runs until whatever the end date is. So it's quite an inflexible leave. You can't just take it whenever you want in the first year. So that's part of the problem with it. And the other part of the problem is that what we at the Fatherhood Institute think is really important is that fathers get access to their own parental leave. Now, parental leave is explicitly about looking after your baby. So paternity leave is really what we would call a health and safety leave. It's about, as maternity leave should be also, it's basically about looking after the health of the mother, making sure that she recovers from the birth, establishes breastfeeding, and so on. So it's basically, so what you're there for as a dad on paternity leave is you're there to support the mother, and almost by definition, you're kind of like an assistant, right? You're like a sort of home care assistant. Now, yes, of course, you've just had a baby, so it also does offer an opportunity to bond with your baby and so on. So there's all sorts of good stuff happens. But in public policy terms, paternity leave exists because we need the dads there to support the mum. In public policy terms, we think we should have in the UK something different from that, which is leave that is explicitly about looking after your baby. And we think some of that should be explicitly for dads. And if he doesn't use it, it's lost to the family. That's called a use it or lose it leave. It's been used in all sorts of other countries. It's you know, the central plank of the Scandinavian models. And it's really important because it can be taken at any point in the first year. So you could, if you wanted to, you could just tack it onto paternity leave, and it would, you know, so you could take 6 weeks at the start. But what you could do is take it later. And we think that's where the power of that daddy month, if you like, really kicks in, is if you hold on to that leave and you take it when the baby is a bit older, ideally at a point where the mum is starting to think about going back to work. And so at that point, you can take your leave and become, by taking it solo, ideally, you can throw yourself in at the deep end and spend a month away from work, really becoming a shit hot, hands-on dad. That's great for you, and it's an amazing experience. If you haven't had that chance, it's an amazing, little bit scary at the start, experience. Transformative. I've spoken to so many dads who've taken a month or longer and just say it's the best thing they've ever done. It really gets you that bond close between you and the baby. Crucially, it's also fantastic for your relationship with the mum, who by this stage is often feeling the weight of, my God, you know, I want to kill myself because all I ever do is see this child, and you know, maybe I could go back to work, but how the hell would I do that? Because I need him to be so good at it. I need him to be as good at it as I am, so that I can confidently leave him in charge, you know? So that's why the daddy month of parental leave is a really important part of the 6 weeks that we're calling for. Now, ideally, as time went on, one would start to add to that. You know, in Scandinavia, depending on which country you're in, sometimes they have like 2 months, 3 months. But you know, if we could get a daddy month, and crucially, if we could get all of this leave finally paid by, you know, reimbursed by the state, that could make a huge difference to families.
And is that reimbursed by the state in the Scandinavian countries, or is this on the employer? How does that work?
No, it is. It's you know, the Scandinavian countries fund this stuff way better than is the case in the UK. So But yeah, so to get from where we are now to something that looks like one of the Scandinavian systems, that's why we've plumped for 6 weeks for dads. That still puts us pretty low in the European league table, if you like, but it's an awful lot better than where we are now. But yeah, it's funding wise, it's a lot. It's to get to the Scandinavian level would require a big investment by government. I mean, having said that, I mean, our good friends at Pregnant Then Screwed earlier this year published a brilliant report. It was them and the Centre for Progressive Policy. They did some estimates looking at European countries where they've got more than 6 weeks or more. And they looked at, they did some clever number crunching to work out what the impact of that is on their economies. So what they found was, in essence, basically, it reduces the gender pay gap and also the labour participation gap. So, in other words, women go back to work quicker, and because because employers know that both mothers and fathers are taking are likely to take a substantial amount of time off when the baby arrives. The pay differentials and the kind of differences in how they perceive and employ and pay men and women starts to close. So all of those good things start to happen. The stuff that we want to happen to create a more equal society. And the figure that they ended up putting on this in terms of how much it could bring to the UK was £23 billion in gross domestic product. Wow. For an investment of something like between 1.4 and 1.6 billion. Okay, so yes, it costs. You're finding £1 billion or £1.5 billion, but in return, what you get is like over 20.
Which is remarkable to be able to do that. You just need someone thinking long term, don't you? That's the only problem, is that politicians tend to, by their nature, think short term.
This is the problem. Yeah, no, it is, and policy making is difficult, and this is a really tough area to get right. It's a very complex set of decisions and balances that you need to strike when you're designing parenting leave systems, especially as is the case in the UK, where we're moving away from such a gendered system, this kind of 52 weeks versus 2 weeks gap is just huge, So what do you do with that? You can, in a sense, what you want to do is sort of tear it all up and start with a blank piece of paper. But of course you can't, because women have the legal right to 52 weeks of leave. So who's gonna start campaigning to take that away from them? That's certainly not a position that the Fatherhood Institute would ever take. Yeah. And not many people would. But I mean, it's very interesting, I think, that it's within the last sort of 18 months, I would say, 18 months, 2 years, more and more people are talking about this, and there is a quite strong feeling now that the father piece of this, you know, the need for fathers to have more and better paid leave is now understood and being talked about and promoted by what could only be described as women's organizations. So, you know, Pregnant Then Screwed is really pushing for this. And it's amazing for us because the Fatherhood Institute being able to partner with Pregnant Then Screwed to argue for better leave for fathers is just, that's amazing, you know? Because for a long, long time, we've been the lone voice kind of pushing and pushing and pushing, trying to get into the room to get dads on the table. And sometimes that's really hard because at the end of the day, we are in a situation where it's the women who are shouldering the bulk of the responsibility for looking after the nation's children. The deal that they get, although yes, they get 52 weeks leave, it's not like the state is paying them a fortune for doing it. You know, they're basically the women of Britain are being kind of expected to sort of do their duty. It's like something from the Second World War. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you will, whether you want to or not, you will take the hit to your career. And yes, you know, and the state will pay you and only you for a certain amount of leave. And, you know, okay, in 2015, they created this useless shared parental leave scheme, which like nobody can, well, a lot of people aren't eligible for. If they are eligible, half the world doesn't understand it. And the ones who do work out that it's completely unaffordable, so they can't take it. So it's like, you know, 2% of eligible couples actually use it. So, you know, they've given a bit of a nod to gender equality, but fundamentally, it is the women of the country who've been kind of saddled with the disadvantaged bits. Now, yes, there are nice bits too. You get to spend lots of time with your baby, and you know, I do feel sometimes like this whole debate gets framed just as, you know, women being like, it's all about the drudgery of childcare. It's like, well, there are good bits to not having to go to the office every day and be the main earner and feel like you never see your child as well. Do you know what I mean? There are downsides for the dads too of this hugely gendered approach that we've currently got. So it's a complex system. What we really need is a, you know, a good. We need to really sit down and unpick it and rebuild something much more imaginative, and from a point of view of investing genuinely in gender equality and in the future of our children. And we're not there yet, but you know, I'm hopeful that the 6 weeks for dads element, if we can get that in, I think what we would be able to do is to really show that this argument of, you know, if we can get the dads fully engaged in caregiving in year one, that will have an impact on the gender pay gap. So it will make women's lives better as well as men's, and most importantly, children's too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it would be a good, if you pardon the pun, baby step into equality.
It would indeed. Yes.
So how can we find out more about the Fatherhood Institute then?
Well, you can go to our delightful new website, which we finally relaunched about a month ago, having lumbered around with this hideous old website for about 15 years. That was like something from the dark ages. So anyway, we've created a much better new one, which is at fatherhoodinstitute.org. And so if you go there, you'll get hopefully a good sense of what we do. There's loads of stuff on there. I suppose what we've tried to do there is show the range and the depth and breadth of what we do, I suppose. So you can see some of the more heavy research type stuff that we do. There's also a policy section which sets out, like just recently, we've published a manifesto for supporting paternal caregiving, so that talks about the 6 weeks for dads bit, but also a whole bunch of other changes, 10 changes that we think the politicians of all parties should be looking at in the run-up to the next election, whenever that is. So yeah, there's lots of good stuff on there, I think.
Excellent. Make sure you sign the petition. As I say, put the link into the description here, but it's also at the website as well. And thank you very much for joining us, Jeremy Davies. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Oh, I've just remembered one more thing I need to plug.
Can
I give a quick plug to the Transition to Parenthood project, which is a research study that we're involved with, led by Middlesex University. And it's basically trying to understand how parents are supported or not who work in small and medium-sized businesses. So that's a huge research gap. Like the only research that exists on that stuff is done in like all, big fancy companies and so on. People with HR departments and policies and all sorts of stuff. So we want to really understand what it's like being a dad when, you work in a company of 4 people or 20 people, or maybe you're the boss, maybe you're a line manager, maybe you're just a member of staff. So we really want to get some dads to be interviewed for that. So if you look for Transition to Parenthood, you'll find us on the website. You'll find us on Twitter and on LinkedIn. So yeah,
great stuff. Well, and we'll put that out on a social media post as well.
Brilliant.
Why not? Why not? Why not?
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, so much. Really, really informative and fascinating stuff. And it's really good to get that on, even though it's a week later than we hoped it would be.
It's a pleasure. It's always good to chat through all these things. And I'm a big fan of Dad La Soul, so it's been a big pleasure.